Welcome from all over the data center critical facilities and digital infrastructure ecosystem to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. I'm your host, Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, and each week we look at a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges from all over the global data center ecosystem, from data center operators like colocation, hyperscale, edge modular, wholesale data center providers, as well as the dozens of different kinds of data center technology and data center facilities related companies, plus all of the construction, real estate, and investment companies in and around data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure, as well as the vibrant outsourced sales and marketing ecosystem that supports the global data center industry. And this show, Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, is for you regardless of where you sit on the go-to-market team. Perhaps you work in some facet of sales, like as an account executive, or sales development or business development rep, an AE, an SDR, or a BDR. Or maybe you work in some facet of marketing, like events marketing, digital marketing, field marketing, social media content, demand generation, paid search, paid social, or product marketing. And speaking of product, maybe you work in some facet of roadmaps and innovation and product management for your company. Or perhaps you get involved post-purchase, like as an account manager, an AM or a CSM, a client success or client service manager. Or perhaps you are the executive sponsor, the leader, the orchestra conductor, the maestro, whose job it is to go out into the global data center ecosystem, into the marketplace, and recruit the best and brightest to join your company to support its amazing growth goals with the most talented people on the planet. If this is the first time that you're joining us for Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, welcome. We're thrilled to have you with us. Let us know in the comments what you do in the data center industry, what you do specifically as an individual, what your team does, and what your company does. If you've been with us before, if you're a frequent flyer, welcome back. We are thrilled to have you with us as well. If you want to make sure that you get invited, that you get notified about upcoming educational events and resources just like this, be sure to subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox on Sundays. You can subscribe for free directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. So what is on the agenda for this week? What are the topics that we're going to be looking at? First, we're going to get into repositioning. And in particular, how do we reposition a data center related go-to-market GTM framework and their activities and processes so we can bring the team together? How do we reposition data center related GTM frameworks and activities and processes to bring the team together? After that, we'll talk specifically about one very, very precise part of the go-to-market team, channel partnerships, and how to attract data center channel partners in specific niches. Next, we'll get into a huge part of the pre-sales motion that so many teams throughout the data center ecosystem are constantly working on, figuring out how to best optimize, especially in the self-driven journey that we now all work within, and with all the constraints with hyper growth around AI and high density, high performance computing, and all the power grid availability realities that we all deal with. So how do get in that environment? How do SDRs, sales development reps, use social marketing, social media, rather than cold calling? How do data center SDRs use social marketing, social media, rather than cold calling? After that, we'll take a real quick break at the halftime mark for a message from our sponsor. And in the second half of this week's show, we'll talk about how to improve data center decision-making cycles, especially in the late part, how to adapt your data center sales process for modern buyers. And as we get ready to head down the home stretch on this week's show, we'll talk about how to build trust in the data center industry with thought leadership. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you, your team, that your company is currently facing that you think would be really interesting, really cool, a lot of fun to address on an upcoming show. Be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform that you like to watch or listen on, and we'll add that to the consideration queue of topics for upcoming shows. So without any further delay, let's jump right into this week's first topic, which is all about repositioning to focus on GTM frameworks, go-to-market frameworks that bring teams together. How do we reposition data center related go-to-market frameworks and activities and processes and bring the team together? My number one recommendation for alignment is to take a pulse for where we are as an industry right now. And in order to take stock of where we are and where we're headed in the coming weeks and the coming months, I think it's really useful to think about where we were as recently as 5 or 10 years ago. I first came into the data center industry in the early 2010s as a byproduct of work that I was doing with managed service providers, MSPs, technology consulting firms, value-added resellers, network integrators. I've been working with them throughout most of the early 2000s, even into the late 1990s, as a result of writing for a trade publication, doing some work for Microsoft's small business server SBS product team in Redmond, Washington, and the direct access SMB channel program at that time. And what I found that as we were headed into the early 2010s, as the world was coming out of the Great Recession, all this housing bubble ramifications and what they did to the global capital markets, and the world was moving from like client server premise based more into a SaaS, software as a centric public cloud kind of infrastructure world. I saw a lot of the legacy channel partners, a lot of the VARs and MSPs that had started in the golden age of client server back in the early days of PCs and local area networks and Novell Network. I saw a lot struggling to reinvent themselves in a world where the hardware refresh cycle wasn't going to be nearly as predictable, nearly as consistent, nearly as profitable and lucrative as it had been in previous generations. But the ones that were figuring it out were tending to go in one of three directions. Either they were moving up market into more out of SMB, out of small and medium-sized business, into more mid-market and enterprise clients, specifically specializing in niches like ERP, enterprise resource planning. Another third were taking the skills that they had developed in building websites and what was known at the time as intranets and extranets, and they were getting really good at building web apps and mobile apps. So another third went in the direction of being like custom app developers. And another third went really, really deep on infrastructure as a service, co-location. And that's where I first started to learn about the data center industry. Is we saw like MSP clients, managed service provider clients, would go to an industry conference like a hospitality conference or a healthcare conference or a financial services conference, and they'd come back and they'd ask their fractional CTO, their virtual chief technology officer, gee, I don't know what this means, but I was at a session at the conference and it said we need to co-locate a server. And some of them were a lot more forward thinking, and they actually learned what that meant and were sitting more in the cockpit along with their fractional CTO, figuring out what that meant. So in the early stages, the early 2010s, we found a lot of VARs and MSPs were taking a server or two of theirs. They were putting that box in a co-location facility, and they were renting out slices of that to their outsourced IT clients. The really forward-thinking clients were like, we don't want to share. We want our own. We don't play well with others. So we want our own box. So that's what I understood about the data center industry for the first few years. Obviously, the 20, 25 different technology-related business models I knew well because I'd spent most of my career there. So I had a pretty good grasp on like storage and hardware and software and cabling and connectivity and cybersecurity. But it wasn't until 2-3 years later that I really started to understand the dynamics of all the facilities niches, cooling and power and commissioning and decommissioning and physical security. Even though when I worked in enterprise IT early on in my career, there was for sure physical security. We just didn't realize it was part of a whole ecosystem of data center facilities. And then understanding the whole data center real estate ecosystem and construction and site selection and design and architecture and real estate and real estate investment trusts, REITs, and private equity and venture capital and everything that goes into making all of that world happen. So eventually by the mid 2010s, a couple of years into that, I really started to understand the data center ecosystem. So in terms of what this has to do with frameworks and activities and processes, it's so important today for your team to have a holistic understanding of what's going on in the data center industry. And for people that are on your team that have been around the data center industry for several years, what it took me a couple of years to figure out, they likely have already internalized because they've been to dozens or hundreds or thousands of client and prospect meetings. They've been to dozens, maybe thousands of events over the course of their career. So they have a really good grasp on that. But for everyone else that's relatively new, a lot of getting your go-to-market team, your GTM team on the same page is they kind of like need a tour guide or a concierge or like the tram operator at the theme park to take them around and introduce them to all of these little nooks and crannies of the data center industry, the operators, the technology related companies, the facilities related companies, construction, real estate, investment, outsourced sales and marketing. They need to understand at a high level how the industry is actually organized, how it's actually segmented. And then of course, they need to understand where your company, your specific division, if you're in a larger company, where that fits into all of that. And it's possible that depending on how expansive your roadmap is, that you may fit into 2 or 3 different parts of the data center ecosystem. And it's that cross-disciplinary talent and that integration that provides a ton of value to your prospects, clients, potentially channel partners. So in terms of bringing everyone together, first is that 30,000 foot view of understanding the ecosystem. Second is to understand that back in that time, like when I first got involved in the ecosystem 10 years ago, it was quite common to find that your prospects and your clients would do a lot of research before they got to you. They'd be looking up all kinds of relevant topics on search engines, on their mobile devices. They'd be asking questions about different technology, facilities related issues on social media, especially on LinkedIn. They'd be listening to some podcasts, watching some YouTube videos, attending some webinars, dropping into some review websites. And they'd get about halfway through that research and decision-making process. And they'd be like, okay, I figured out enough. Now I've taken this as far as I can on my own. Now I'm ready to talk to someone from your sales team. I'll fill out a form to talk to sales, request a quote, schedule a tour, schedule a needs assessment, schedule a consultation, something like that. And at the time, CEB, the corporate executive board that's now owned by Gartner, found that about 57% of the action, 57% of the game was over before you got to meet a prospecting client, before they were ready for vendor contact or a conversation with someone from your sales team. That wasn't too bad, because if you did everything right, yeah, you missed the first 57% of the party, but you were there for the last 43%. So you still had a significant amount of surface area to shape how they looked at your category. That world in which we live in, almost half of the research and decision making, is now very much in the rearview mirror, very much a point of nostalgia as a result of 10 years of digital transformation, of which our industry was for sure leading the charge on digital transformation. Be careful what you wish for. Second, we've seen a lot of baby boomers retiring and a lot more Gen Z and millennials in decision-making roles. We also had tens of millions of people in the early 2020s working from home, some of which continue to be either 100% work from home or hybrid. And that has massive ramifications for being independent, being able to self-serve, demanding self-serve, not willing to put up with a lot of jumping through a lot of hoops. So we've ended up in this world now where that 57% number has jumped to at least 83%. Gartner's latest publicly released research, and we know it's actually even more than that because we see it firsthand, is that at least 83% of the research comparing options and decision-making now happens before you get to meet prospects and clients without you in the room. And this is an enormous challenge, but it's also a really, really big opportunity for clients that recognize that only being in there for the final 17%, if you're lucky, kind of sucks. It's not a good place to be. So we need to figure out a better playbook for you and your team. And especially when we talk about depending on the nature of your business model and your ideal clients and your addressable market and your target buyer personas, if you're selling to highly technical, highly educated, highly skeptical, highly cynical IT buyers or engineers or construction related folks or other highly educated B2B buyers in the ecosystem, they're more sales allergic than they've ever been. In other words, they will run through a glass window, walk over hot coals. Exaggerating maybe a little bit. They don't want to spend a lot of time with your sales team if they can find a better way to get those answers. And another nod to be careful what you wish for, it's not just the end run around you from 10 years ago, the search engines, the mobile devices, the social media, the podcasts, the YouTube videos, the review websites. It's all of that. And in addition to that, what happened at the end of 2022 that changed the data center industry permanently in a very profound and very acceleration-y, is that a word? Speeding up the growth of everything. Generative AI, ChatGPT, Copilot, Perplexity, Claude, Grok, Gemini. What do those all have in common? The mother of all instant gratification, self-service engines, tools, and apps. So what does this mean? What this means is now a lot of your highly technical, highly educated, skeptical, sales allergic prospects have gotten so accustomed to getting instant answers from tools like ChatGPT that essentially these apps are your competition. What do you mean by your competition? Well, they are enjoying that experience of not having to click 10 blue links and figuring things out themselves and filling out a form and waiting a few hours or a few days to hear back from you, only to be put through a very selfish sales process. They're enjoying having an end run around you and getting instant answers to this. So this changes the nature of what we need to do to be successful in earning our way back in that first 83% of the journey, where effectively, if you keep doing things the way you've been doing all along, you're going to be locked out. Persona non grata. They want nothing to do with salespeople until they're almost ready to buy. But this doesn't have to be a showstopper if you have a better playbook, if you have a better strategy. And a lot of that strategy resides around a very, very simple, but for many companies, often a complex culture, game-changing mindset. The idea that we no longer can afford to be seen as a vendor. We got to get out of the vendor box, and we got to stay out of the vendor box. And in this self-driven buyer's journey, where nearly all of the game, nearly all of the research, comparing options, evaluating pricing happens without you in the room, we can't afford to look like our traditional stereotypes anymore. We can't afford to just show up as sales and marketing and client success and product. We instead need to show up looking a lot more like teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, perhaps even thought leaders. This changes the very nature of who gets hired onto go-to-market teams. We've seen a massive acceleration in the last year or two of companies that are bringing career IT professionals and career engineers into account executives and business development kinds of roles. Why? Because they know when it comes to highly technical, highly educated, sales allergic prospects and clients, those prospects and clients may not want to spend time with a salesperson, but they really do enjoy, in most cases, spending time with their peers. And to the extent that you've hired someone that as recently as a few months ago or a few years ago was a peer of theirs, that speaks the same language, that understands the same frameworks, that has an enormous amount of empathy for what they're going through, that can have a game-changing impact. So the shift to a self-driven buyer's journey doesn't just send a lot of revenue opportunities away from traditional sales teams and into self-serve marketplaces and into channel partners. It also opens up a tremendous opportunity for those companies, those teams that are successful and reposition themselves to look a lot more like Big Four consultants and a lot more like trusted advisors and experts. And the playbook for how most companies are approaching this is they're reframing their interactions to be a lot more centered around their prospects and clients' need for professional development and learning and development. Because as much as these self-service preferences are a very, very real potential barrier and potential roadblock, these exact same prospects and clients still need to learn a lot to keep their skills sharp. We know the digital infrastructure, data center industry, critical facilities is changing very, very rapidly. More change in the last 2 years than the previous 25 years. So to the extent that your client-facing team members can take an active role in providing these amazingly specific, amazingly helpful, immersive educational experiences, again, as part of learning and development and professional development, it is a way to get you back in there early and often. Again, this changes the nature of how you hire. This changes the nature of how you upskill and reskill. We started noticing the upskilling, reskilling trend a couple of years ago when we spoke with executives at co-location operators. And we were starting to find that career account executives were describing how they kept their skills sharp. And it wasn't just that they were investing in training and certifications. They were investing in training and certifications that were the same programs that their prospects and clients, entry level, intermediate level, even in some cases, senior level stakeholders, decision committee members were going through themselves. So there's for sure that mirroring of credentials. So one, so you have credibility, and second, you can speak the same language and get to the point where you have a trusted relationship so they can tell you what's really going on. So it's not just finding the time to go through these training and certification programs to mirror what your prospects and clients are doing. In addition to that, we found a lot of account executives were building home computer labs, like mini data centers in their home offices, so they could experiment and get their skills sharp and really, really understand truly what's going on. Obviously, it would be crazy expensive to be experimenting with the latest and greatest, but in a lot of co-location facilities, what happens after a couple of years of shelf life with newly purchased equipment? It gets decommissioned, right? So this is, again, a executive leadership, cultural, company culture type of initiative. And in a perfect world, HR and talent acquisition and chief people officers would be getting very, very involved in this. So it's not enough to just give a stipend to be able to take some courses and training and certifications. It's this mindset that before decommissioned equipment goes out the door and gets donated, maybe there's some internal stakeholders that could get a heck of a lot of use out of it for 6, 12, 18 months by repurposing that into assets that they could use nights and weekends to be able to keep their skills sharp. Where do you find the time for all of this aside from nights and weekends? Well, there's a lot of people in the data center industry that spend a ton of time waiting for flights, on flights, sitting in Ubers, going to dozens of conferences a year, going to client sites, going to prospect sites. And even beyond all that travel time, there's a lot of research that backs up that a significant amount of high performers in this field spend a lot of time working out too. So in addition to having potentially dozens, maybe even hundreds of hours a year to be able to listen to and watch some of this content in airport lounges, on flights where you have good Wi-Fi or what have you, probably a significant amount of time that you can recapture by listening to some of this content while you're going for a bike ride or jog around your neighborhood or on the elliptical or on the treadmill at the gym or all of the above. Remember, you don't have to be able to watch training to be able to get 80 or 90% of the value in most cases. Listening just in your ears the first time through, even if it's not practical to be able to watch on the screen because it wouldn't be safe to watch on the screen depending on what you're actually doing. But a lot, again, is mindset and culture. So when it comes to repositioning your framework and your activities and processes to bring the team together, a lot of the common framework is recognizing that the best purpose, the best way forward for your go-to-market team to be able to get in early and often with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context, is to think about how these job responsibilities, how these functions need to evolve to position your client-facing team members as world-class experts on anything and everything having to do with your category. Now, when you do your skills inventory, you'll likely figure out that there's some more seasoned veteran members on your team who do have the technical skills to be able to do this. You'll also likely find that there's some people relatively early on in their career who may be considerably more junior. And there's a place for all of the above, because even the more junior level hires, which a lot of times might map into an entry level marketer, an entry level account manager, a sales development rep, or something like that, You still need tour guides, you still need concierges, you still need hosts, you still need moderators. But at the end of the day, what we really want to do is get super specific about that ideal client profile. So we know geographically where they're located, how big or small their companies are in terms of headcounts, what's so small that they can't afford your minimums, what's so big that is very unlikely to close. What are the industries? What are the verticals? What are the niches that are an especially good fit and then especially bad fit? All of that gets baked into building your target account list, which for most parts of the data center ecosystem usually is a couple hundred companies. But if you're highly specialized, like a hyperscaler, hyperscale provider, hyperscale data center, wholesale data center, maybe there's only a couple dozen. In other more commoditized or national addressable markets or global addressable markets, there's probably thousands, if not tens of thousands. And how you divvy that up among your sales team is certainly something that chief revenue officers and chief commercial officers, CROs and CCOs spend a lot of time on. But once you have that ICP, that ideal client profile defined and your target account list defined, what we really want to zero in on is who are the 2 or 3 different roles on that decision committee that are going to have the biggest economic impact on your success within that company. The most important stakeholder on that decision committee is your primary buyer persona. The second most important kind of stakeholder, category of stakeholder on that decision committee is your secondary buyer persona. And depending on your company size, your resources, you may have a segmentation strategy that's significantly more sophisticated than just a primary and a secondary. But if this is brand new to you, splitting up your who we help section on your homepage, on your website navigation into 2 options is certainly way better than lumping everyone into one. And what we need to know for each of these segments is extreme client centricity. What is going on in their world? What are their 5 or 6 biggest goals, objectives that they're working on that show up in things like objectives and key results, OKRs, job descriptions, LinkedIn descriptions, conversations? What are they really trying to move the needle on in the next 1, 2, 4 quarters that have a massive impact on their ability to get promoted, earn a bonus, or just stay gainfully employed? And conversely, besides those goals, what are their biggest struggles, their challenges, their stressors that are driving them bonkers, nuts, that are messing with their work-life balance, causing them to pull all-nighters, pulling them away from vacations where they end up with a lot of resentment from their family members from getting pulled away from their vacations, messing with their mental health, a whole host of things that just are driving them nuts. So once you know the consensus, the top 5 or 6 biggest goals, the top 5 or 6 biggest challenges, those 10 or 12 topics in aggregate should essentially become a huge part, not only of your website copywriting and your lead generation strategy, but essentially your events calendar. Because a huge part of getting your GTM team across marketing, sales, product, account management, strategy, executive sponsor on the same page is getting hyper-focused around how you can provide amazing educational experiences to your most important ideal clients in your target accounts. And in order to provide extreme relevance for each one of these segments, for your primary buyer persona, for your secondary buyer persona, maybe there's 3 or 4 different segments. If your company is significantly larger, it may be even more than that. But let's, for simplicity, say there's 2 segments right now. And we know each of those segments has 10 or 12 issues that are on their front burner. Those 10 or 12 topics, once a month for the next 10 or 12 months, those are your topics for your in-person educational events or your hosted educational events. In other words, if you have the luxury of a significant amount of your target accounts being within, say, a 30 or 60-minute drive of where you're located, these events should be held in person. If you have a much more expansive, much more geographically diverse addressable market, and people are spread out across multiple time zones, maybe even multiple nations, then this exact same strategy can be adapted as a webinar series or virtual events or summit, online summit or something like that. But at the end of the day, what we really want to focus on is one topic each month for each of the segments. So in other words, if you decide that your primary buyer persona is a CTO and your chief technology officer and your secondary segment is the finance leader, as chief financial officer, a CFO, then we need their 10 or 12 topics, and they each get a monthly event, which ideally is a breakfast seminar or lunch and learn or something similar to that in your conference room or in your classroom. If it's not practical to host this in person, then it's a virtual event like a webinar. And again, If you have the luxury of being able to segment your sales team so they each work on different personas, for sure, have a different series. The great part with this is relative to what most companies in the data center ecosystem spend on attending and potentially exhibiting and sponsoring or speaking at national and global conferences. Hosting your own events can be done for very, very little financial budget. After all, you already have a classroom or a conference room, right? If you don't, maybe you have a foyer that can be repurposed for that. So does it really cost anything to rent that out for 2 hours once a month, 2 hours twice a month? I don't know. Maybe there's some wonky internal chargeback system within your company, but probably the cost is pretty close to zero. You likely already have a CRM, a customer relationship management system, and an email marketing program. If not, super, super important to have these tools, have this infrastructure in place. So what is the cost incrementally to send out a couple of emails to invite people to an educational event? Sure, there's time. You need to figure out the strategy. You need to sit with someone from your marketing team, your events team, to come up with your landing page headline and your copywriting and the bullet points. And they need to set up the landing page and the confirmation page and the emails and some graphics and concepts. And you need to sit with your subject matter expert and make sure that you have the right kind of subject matter experts that can provide a ton of educational value. Because again, these are educational events. No one's going to come to your infomercial. Frankly, if you take all of the effort and you bring the right people to your company to this event and you spend the entire time pitching them, they're not going to come to part 2 or part 3. And they probably aren't going to take your calls anymore. So err on the side of giving a ton of value. You want them to see that that landing page is oozing so much relevance, so much extreme value, that it's very, very likely that when they get the email back that says who else should attend, that they're like, oh yeah, there's 2 or 3 other people that I work with, another person from another team. I'm going to forward this to all of them because we know the teams that learn together grow together. So when that happens, you're proactively driving alignment in the formative stages of the buyer's journey when they're open to having you shape the criteria. Because if you only meet one person from that company, you don't have a lot of surface area on that decision committee, and you've been totally absent in the first 83% of the buyer's journey because you said, I don't know, that strategy that guy Joshua Feinberg's talking about, wow, we already sunk a lot into that cabana party and golf tournament and that huge booth at the conference. Like, we're really spread. The problem is very few of those huge initiatives are getting you in early, and very few of those are getting you in often. It can be crazy expensive to do those often. Could you really afford to sponsor 52 cabana parties or 52 golf tournaments a year? I guess if you're a Fortune 1000 company, of course, but if you have limited resources, those at-bats are really, really expensive. When you're talking about hosting your own events, see, what messes people up is they're chasing vanity metrics. They think that because they're at a conference with hundreds or thousands of people, that's going to magically result in hundreds or thousands of leads. The reality is, a lot of people are asleep at the wheel when it comes to doing the most basic due diligence on conference attendee demographics. Like, at the minimum, get hold of their prospectus, get hold of their media kit that talks about the demographics from last year and what they anticipate the demographics to be this year. Put that on the left-hand side of your screen. And on the right-hand side of the screen, bring up your ideal client profile and your target buyer personas and just do a simple comparison. If most of the people that are going to be at that conference line up pretty well, like at least a 75, 80% match rate, that's a pretty good conference to be on your short list. Then the next step is, how can we get you onto the stage so you have an opportunity to educate and build trust? Because at most conferences, realistically, like 75 speakers, 2,500 attendees, only like 3% of the people that are there actually get to educate and build trust. Usually the speakers bring along a couple of coworkers, so maybe by goodwill that's running off of the speaker onto their coworkers, maybe there's 10%, 250 of the 2,500 people at the conference getting to do some education and trust building. Everyone else is just trying to interrupt and beg for a couple moments of the booth, or you're just the product. You're just there, the captive audience, of which if you don't go, there's of course no conference. So the question is like, okay, so if you're at the right conferences and you're speaking, great. But if you have a really low match rate, like only 10 or 20% of the people at that conference match up with your ideal client profile or match up with your prioritized buyer personas, what are you doing? Are you really think that it's a sustainable strategy to get your employer to send you to a tropical resort for 4 or 5 days on the company's dime as if everyone gets to go to President's Club? You can try that a couple times, but eventually your CFOs and your board members are going to be watching this and figuring out that, like, shit, we're being scammed, man. We're being played. We spent $3 million on conferences last year, and where's the ROI? It reminds me of as a Gen Xer, there was a TV commercial that was really popular in the 1980s in the United States. There's the Wendy's fast food restaurant. There was this lady that looked in between the two pieces of bread and couldn't find any substantially sized hamburger on the roll. And the catch line was, "Where's the beef?" If you're really curious, you can go look that up on YouTube. I'm sure you'll find it pretty easily. So the question is, like, where's the ROI? And when you're placing these crazy, crazy high financial bets, you better be really, really sure that it's your ideal client profile, that your prioritized buyer personas, and most of all, that you're putting yourself in a position to educate and build trust. Because for the cost of what you're spending on one of those events, you can fund an entire year of 12 or 24 or more of your own self-hosted events. It's that much of an order of magnitude difference. And the difference with your self-hosted events is there's no loss factor. 100% of the people that get invited are on your target account list. You control the invites. Why would you invite anyone that's not on your target account list? And 100% of the people that you invite line up with your prioritized buyer personas. Sometimes people get a little greedy out of the gate and they're like, well, I really wanted the CTO and I only got a couple people from the CTO's team. I'm like, dude, this is the first time through. You got 3 people that are on the CTO's team, 2 of which are direct reports, and you're being greedy and saying the CTO didn't come the first time around. Do a great job. The CTO will come the second or third time around. And most of all, you're winning over the stakeholders, because everyone thinks that there's a magic decision maker. There is no magic decision maker anymore. What does that mean? Every executive has gotten so ridiculously risk averse in the last couple of years that even if you manage to get a warm introduction to the person that ultimately needs to sign off, one of the first things, if not the first things they're going to ask you is, have you built consensus for this initiative with my team? If you do deer in headlights and you have no idea that a team even exists, let alone have met them and won them over, you're going to get sent back to the starting line. So what that means is there's no such thing as a decision maker anymore. There's a decision committee. And if you're not using education and trust building to win over multiple stakeholders, to increase your surface area in these target accounts, someone else is going to do it. I can assure you that you are not going to be the first person that has ever invited these IT professionals or engineers or whoever you're selling to. You are not going to be the first person that's ever invited them to a nifty, relevant sounding webinar or lunch and learn event or symposia, without a doubt, because these have been around in the data center ecosystem for 10 or 15 years. And they've been around in the broader B2B technology ecosystem for literally decades. I started playing around with webinars in 2008. And for 4 or 5 years before that, teleconferences on Bridgelines. And before that, in-person breakfast seminars, after-hours seminars, educational events. So you for sure are not going to be the first person that invites them. This is where the hyper-relevance for who they are, what they care about, squarely focused on their goals and their challenges in their own words, is so incredibly relevant. So if you want to reposition your framework, your activities, and your processes to bring the team together, this is how to bring the team together. The common goal is to be a huge, huge part of the professional development and learning development process with your most important ideal clients, with your most important ideal prospects, so that you're in there early in the full buyer's journey, not just one and done. There's no such success with one and done anymore. There's at least 25 to 30 touch points that everyone's going to go through between complete stranger and purchase decision. So we need to get in there early and we need to get in there often. And it's all about educating and building trust. They are only going to be interested in seeing your demo, signing up for an assessment, taking the tour, when you've educated and built trust with those folks. This is the game. This is where there's an opportunity for you to win. There's also, if you sit this out, going to be a lot of painful interactions that happen in the late stages of the journey if you missed the first 83% of the party, if you missed the first 83% of the game, because rest assured, they're learning from someone. Do you want your ideal clients? Do you want your future clients? Do you want your prospects to be learning from your competitors? Or do you want to be the ones that are teaching your best ideal prospects, your best ideal clients, how to navigate all of the different options that are in front of them in your category? That's what I'd be thinking about for repositioning data center related go-to-market frameworks, activities, and processes, and bring the team together. And make no mistake, for a lot of companies, this is going to be a pretty big culture change, really, really big seismic culture change. And depending on your company's size, this is a big enough culture change that your internal champion for this kind of initiative needs to be all the way up at the top. If your company has fewer than 500, fewer than 200 employees, the CEO needs to get behind this. If you work for a multinational company with thousands or tens of thousands of employees or more, that's probably not practical, but your division VP, your division managing director, all the way up at the top, because it usually comes from the same kind of frustration of, you know what, we're tired of our sales team getting ghosted. We're tired of the sarcasm, the condescension. We're tired of being treated like crap. We're better than that. We have some of the smartest people on the planet when it comes to our category, when it comes to our niche within the data center ecosystem. Gosh darn it, it is time that we let the data center industry know about this in a very, very profound way. We're tired of all the toll takers. We're tired of all the intermediaries. We are taking our educational events directly to the target buyer personas where we know we can make the most impact. So we're in there early and often. So we get out of the vendor box, we stay out of the vendor box, and we put ourselves squarely in a position where we can over and over and over again throughout the full buyer's journey, being the ones who are taking the lead on educating and building trust with multiple stakeholders from the decision committee in our target accounts. That's what I'd be thinking about when it comes to repositioning your data center related go-to-market GTM framework, activities and processes, and bringing the team together. If you're getting good value so far from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you help to spread the word by hitting the like button on whatever platform that you're watching or listening on. If you have the ability to rate and review that, we'd love that as well. So what is up next? What's our next topic for this week? How do we attract data center channel partners in specific niches? How do we attract the right data center channel partners in specific niches? This is a fantastic question, especially for companies that already have both a direct and an indirect go-to-market playbook. And there's a couple of different size scenarios that become super relevant. We're going to start with the startups. We're going to start with relatively small companies that have less than a few dozen employees, because those are the ones that tend to show up with the biggest needs when they land on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast or the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, DCSMI. And a lot of times they're not even articulating this as going out to recruit channel partners. They're essentially looking for a lipstick on a you-know-what of a commission-only salesperson. In other words, they heard somewhere along the line that if they can get salespeople to work for them part-time, maybe even full-time, and only pay them when they close, that everything will be all hunky-dory and their GTM, their go-to-market results will look like a hockey stick. The problem with early-stage companies taking this kind of approach is it's very challenging to get a successful channel partner program off the ground and sustain and grow this. This is the domain of full-time channel partnership professionals. Throughout infrastructure as a service, data center operators, data center technology, data center facilities, there are literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands on a global basis of people that have the word channel or partner or channel partnerships or some variation of that sitting in their job title on LinkedIn. So the reason that that exists is it works exceptionally well, but it takes some time to get it off the ground. So what are some of the key milestones that need to happen if you're thinking about, if you're fantasizing, if you're speculating about how cool it would be for your company to have a commission-only army of salespeople that are bringing you great clients and servicing those clients without you having to take on fixed overhead, without you having to train, without you having to pay for health insurance, all their travel budget, all that other stuff. So what needs to happen? What's the sequence here? First, as a relatively early company, you need to get to product market fit, PMF. That's where you have extreme clarity around who your ideal clients are, the products and services they purchase from you, the price points, the frequencies, the terms, basically all of the unit economics, like average client lifetime value, monthly or annual recurring revenue, cost of client acquisition, the ratio of lifetime value to client acquisition cost, all the things that get your CFO and get your board of directors super excited. For a relatively young early stage company, this usually happens at somewhere between like one and a few dozen employees. Sometimes it happens as early on as like hitting double digits, hitting 10, 15 employees. And again, usually the milestone with this is you have a lot of clarity. And the way we can tell externally that you have a lot of clarity on who your ideal clients are is when we look at your website and we look at your case studies, we look at your reviews, we look at your testimonials, we look at your logos, we see a common narrative that we can figure out externally about who your ideal clients are. In other words, that's a fantastic way for someone to evaluate your company and whether you know what you're actually doing. Is if they see as a relatively small company that there's some commonalities among your success stories and they can basically define your ideal client profile without talking to you, then you're well on your way to having product market fit, PMF. And this was a concept that's literally been around for decades. It started in Silicon Valley in the late 1990s in the boardrooms meetings of folks like Mark Andreessen and Steve Blank and Eric Ries of Lean Startup fame. The next step for a company beyond product market fit is getting to go-to-market fit. Go-to-market fit means that you've progressed beyond all of the sales needing to happen with the founders of the company, and you've hired your first several handfuls of sales professionals, account executives, sales development reps, sales leaders, sales managers, sales directors, whatever you want to call it. And you've found success in non-founders being able to generate leads, qualify those leads, create opportunities, close opportunities, and bring on clients repeatedly that have a lot of success with your company. The clients don't churn, the sales professionals don't churn, the clients stay with you for a while and hit the early indicator, the leading indicator of initial value, and then intended value and extended value. And you have lots of people from your sales team that are achieving and exceeding quota, hitting President's Club, and life is good. That's the sign that you've achieved go-to-market fit. And what that means generally is you can put a lot more capital into the business and the wheels aren't going to fall off. You're not going to have a revolving door with employee churn. You're not going to have a revolving door with clients churning. Everything is largely good. The next step above and beyond that is channel partner market fit. And what that means is you've successfully achieved product market fit, you've achieved go-to-market fit, and now you're ready to take the playbooks that you figured out with your own internal full-time employees and figure out how to repurpose some of those playbooks for people to run marketing, sales, and servicing clients that are not full-time employees, not part-time employees of yours, but are independent companies. That in the case of like a data center operator or data center technology company, they might be value-added resellers, VARs, they may be network integrators, managed service providers, master agents, something like that. And the key thing with that is they can't figure out your milestones, your metrics, your stages of maturity until you've figured out those yourself. If you prematurely manipulate a channel partner into becoming a channel partner and you haven't had success internally, one, that channel partner probably hasn't been around the block very many times. And second, you're going to burn your bridges really, really fast when they realize that you're using them as a guinea pig, that you're using them to run experiments on. All of those experiments, for the most part, should be done by the time you put up your first page looking to recruit channel partners. Before you go and hire the first person full-time attached to your LinkedIn company page that has the word channel or partnerships or something like that on it. And obviously, as your company continues to grow in the same way you scale your sales team, you scale your channel partners, your channel partnership organization. So the reason that this is especially relevant is that when it comes to attracting data center channel partners in specific niches, it's really, really important to make sure that you've satisfied your prerequisites to set these folks up for success. And channel partners can be fantastic. especially for companies in the data center ecosystem that want to scale geographically across multiple regions where they don't necessarily have a field office, where they don't necessarily have employees. Like, let's say, for example, you have a software company. I'll give a perfect example of a software company. I had the CEO on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast a few months back. The name of the company is called Avtech. They're based in Rhode Island, in New England, in the United States, and they create a environmental monitoring software program called Room Monitor. So Avtech software, I think 30, 40 years old at this point. Rick Grundy was on the podcast, and we talked about how for them a great channel partner isn't just someone that's local, but has allowed them to scale internationally. So they gave a great example of when they were looking to grow in the Middle East and another region of the world. And it was a combination of eventually setting up some presence, but early on being able to get a lot of insight by talking to VARs and integrators and managed service providers in that local area. And that's a very, very common trend that we see for companies that want to expand geographically, as they look at companies that already have existing relationships in a particular region. In some cases, they decide they're not going to have boots on the ground, that they're not going to have a physical presence in that region at all, and they hire a distributor, a wholesaler, agent, or someone like that, manufacturer's representative, to represent them in that particular country. And that country gets an exclusive for developing that business and handling all of the marketing and all of the sales and all the service of that particular company. So channel partnerships can be fantastic for that. They're also, when we look at selling into especially small and medium-sized businesses, a lot of times it may not be cost effective for you to build your own demand generation engine, your own sales team, your own sales organization to sell to smaller companies where their monetization strategy may not be as favorable as selling to mid-market and enterprise. So a lot of times channel partners are in a much better position to be doing all of the marketing and doing all the selling and the servicing of those accounts for companies that are a little bit too small to justify going direct with. And the reason that it's interesting for a channel partner is their reseller commission, their channel partner commission that they make, a lot of times is only a small portion of their overall revenue strategy, of their revenue stream. So say, for example, we'll use US and round numbers for this example. So let's say they sell a $50,000 software license for you, and they earn a 20% reseller commission on that. So there's a $10,000 US commission on that $50,000 sale, which you might say is significant, but when it comes to scaling up demand generation and thought leadership and running a sales organization, everything like that, that's probably not a home run for most people. It's probably more a single or a double, meaning it's like a small to medium-sized sale. However, that same account that just bought a $50,000 software license, there's been all kinds of research going back decades that companies that get SaaS typically spend 3 times, 6 times, 10 times more on that in professional services, in installation, customization, integration, ongoing maintenance, a whole host of professional services that get bolted on along with that software license. So that VAR, that channel partner, that managed service provider may have made a $10,000 commission, but they may have made another $100,000 on that client, both initially and on an ongoing basis, with installation, configuration, integration, customization, ongoing support, a whole host of professional services that are necessary for that particular client to get value out of it. So they're highly motivated to not only utilize that initial sale as a loss leader and a supplementary revenue stream, but there's a whole other business model that they're tapping into because of their partnership with your particular company. Now, over time, what happens with a lot of companies that run channel partner organizations is they find out that there's a couple of different kinds of channel partners that they engage with. And some need more support than others. Some need different support. Some need different incentives. Some need white label, where your company is completely invisible to the client. Others, not so much of an issue. But yeah, you figure all these things out over time. But once you get to the point where you have at least a handful or two of channel partners that have been with your company for a while, they've been through some cycles, they're happy with the compensation, they're happy that you're being responsive, that you're being reliable, that you're not embarrassing them in front of their client, that you're not leaving them holding the bag, and you've gotten to the point that there's multiple people that are up on your channel partners page giving great testimonials, case studies, reviews of your relationship with them, you have hit channel partner market fits. So the reason that I talked about product market fit, the reason that I talked about channel partner market fit, go-to-market fit, and the stages in between is in huge companies where there is a channel partner organization where you go and to the LinkedIn company page on Sales Navigator and you say, I want to see everyone in this company with the word channel or partnerships or channel partnerships and titles. For companies that are very well established, you'll see handfuls, dozens, maybe even hundreds of people or more that work in some facet of channel partner relationships. For a lot of companies that are just getting started with this, sometimes they jump into it a little bit prematurely and they can burn a lot of goodwill in the industry and cause a lot of reputation problems. And hopefully by what we've just talked through here, you'll prevent yourself from doing that by jumping into channel partnerships prematurely. But in terms of attracting channel partners in specific niches, I would encourage you to look at it as another type of buyer persona. In the same way that you may have a primary buyer persona, a secondary buyer persona, this could be a tertiary buyer persona, a third buyer persona. So for example, say a channel partnership that's super common among co-location operators is a co-location operator will have a direct channel partner persona where they're selling to like the CTO of a mid-market company. They may have that's their primary. Their secondary is they have a self-serve kind of offering that is priced at a lower price point where they're selling to a slightly more technical small business owner that's not a career IT professional, but has needs for a significant amount of co-location because they're in a highly technical or regulated type of industry. And then their tertiary buyer persona may be a managed service provider or some kind of channel partner. So in the same way that in order to have an effective website page and lead generation offers and event strategies, you really dig into the goals and the challenges for each of those segments. You want to dig into the goals and challenges for your channel partners as well. So as you're building that channel partnership page and eventually that section of your website and lead generation offers and events, you're leaning into the goals that they're trying to achieve to grow professionally as individuals, as teams, as companies, and what's driving them nuts, which in many cases, what's driving them nuts is likely, when you dig a little deeper, going to be them venting their frustration about other channel partner programs that they have invested in the past. And listen to all of that feedback. You want to make sure that you try to do one better. But most of all, a lot of that feedback can roll right into premium content offers, blogging strategy, video strategy, LinkedIn post strategy, and educational event strategy. So I would encourage you, in the same way that you're building inbound leads, outbound events, nurturing all of the above for your primary and secondary, for your main direct buyer personas, also build that exact same kind of engine for attracting and engaging potential channel partners. Now, if you work for like Cisco or Microsoft or AWS, you're not going to have to work too hard to attract and engage and educate and build trust with potential channel partners. They will come directly to your door because you have a massive amount of brand and goodwill. Same thing for like Digital Realty or Equinix. If you have the benefit of working for a huge brand, this isn't going to be as challenging. But if your company is relatively new to working with like VARs and MSPs and integrators and agents, yeah, you need to educate and build trust with that segment before you can get them to the real starting line where they sign up on the onboard as a new channel partner. And that's a whole host of education and trust building challenges that's known as channel partner enablement, channel partner activation. And as soon as your company gets slightly larger, that's usually the first split on the org chart, as you have someone whose job it is to recruit and onboard new channel partners. And then you have another person who's like a channel accounts manager, channel coordinator, whatever you want to call it, who works with existing channel partners on co-selling, selling through, basically as your channel partners start to introduce you to potential opportunities. That's the person from your company that goes on joint sales calls with that person and brings in other resources as necessary. So these are existing channel partners and you're helping them grow their book of business with your company. And again, these hires get multiplied and multiplied and multiplied as you continue to grow your channel partner organization. But that's what I'd be thinking about when it comes to attracting data center channel partners in specific niches. You can use the exact same framework that you use for lead generation. In other words, you have an ideal client profile, should also have a ideal partner profile, ideal channel partner profile, know geographically where they're located, know how big or small their companies are, know this particular niches that are going after that are particularly good fit, know what particular niches you want to stay away from that are especially bad fit. From there, you should be able to build a target channel partner list in the same way you'd build a target account list. It's a couple dozen or a couple hundred, maybe a few thousand potential channel partners you'd love to work with, and then segment those. Who's the most important and second most important person in those accounts? What can you do to educate and build trust with people early and often throughout their full journey as they're exploring potential companies to partner with? And again, in the same way that a SaaS company, software as a service, infrastructure as a service, IaaS, any company based on recurring revenue has another starting line as soon as a new client signs on, because basically you're selling every 30 days. Your channel partners, same thing, is once they get signed on, once they got onboarded, it's a whole new set of responsibilities, kind of different responsibilities. You're not worried about attracting them anymore. You're worrying about training them and enabling them and getting them to make time for you on their schedule. That's one of the big things that everyone always underestimates, is when you have sales professionals, account managers, when you have marketers that are on your payroll, they're working for you like 40, 50, 60 hours a week. You have your 100% undivided attention. Channel partners, a lot of times, are channel partners with you and 5, 10, 20 organizations. So if they work on channel partnerships one day a week, let's say they're working on channel partnerships on Wednesdays, but there's 20, so they're spending 1/5, 20% of their time in the course of the week on channel partnerships, but they're spreading that among 20 different channel programs that they participate in. What's 5% of 20%? Math may be a little slow, but that sounds like it's about 1% of their week. So 1% of their week. So what's 20? You have 20%. What's 1/20th of 20%, right? There you go. So what that really comes down to is you want to work extra hard to earn your way early and often, and be prepared for one-off, be prepared one-to-many, live, on demand, all of the above. This is where, again, channel partner professionals spend their entire careers here. They're not just dabbling because they know it can be really, really lucrative to your company, but it can take quite a bit to get that off the ground. And there's channel awards, there's channel activation, there's channel loyalty. And rest assured, you don't want to go recruit channel partners too early, because if you're not ready, you burn a lot of goodwill. Their memories are long. Relatively small industry can cause a lot of reputational anti-goodwill, a lot of brand damage that could take you quite a bit to recover from. So my recommendation is to avoid going into having a channel partner program until you're really, really ready to go all in and fully support your channel partners in the way that they're going to require, the way that they're going to expect, when you look at the other channel programs that they participate in and the kind of resources that they're getting from other channel programs that they spend part of that Wednesday, for part of that one day a week on. So that's what I'd be thinking about for attracting the right data center channel partners in very specific niches. Okay, what is up next? Our next question for today is, how do data center SDRs, sales development reps, use social media, social marketing rather than cold calling? How can sales development reps use social media marketing rather than cold calling? That's a terrific question. So I've been pounding the drum on this now for well over 10 years. I started giving workshops at national conferences on LinkedIn social selling easily at least 10 years ago at this point. So if this is something that's relatively new, just understand that you're playing catch up. You're not going to be the first one that's tried to get good at this. That's the bad news. The good news is most people that do this still kind of suck at it. And usually the tendency among sales development reps is, because they're usually early on in their career, they get handed a very self-serving, very selfish playbook by their leadership team to go out and essentially book meetings. And the challenge is that at any given time, even if you do an exquisite job of identifying your ideal client profile, defining your addressable market, understanding your buyer personas, only between like 5 and 15% of given people in your persona are ready for that kind of interaction at any given time. At which point you say, oh, okay, so I might have to contact them 20 times before they finally accept my meeting. No, what's going to end up happening by the 3rd or 4th time that you obnoxiously push and push and push for a meeting that they're not ready for, they're going to either block you, they're going to unsubscribe, they're going to mentally block you, or all of the above. So the key with all of this is to recognize that in a self-driven buyer's journey, no one is losing sleep anymore, wondering that they're going to have a hard time finding salespeople to talk to. They are still losing sleep about their job responsibilities, what they're trying to achieve professionally, what they're struggling with. And as I talk about, this whole idea of early and often is really, really important. But the early and often isn't just about trying to personalize a hook or personalize a subject line to get them to think that you studied their LinkedIn profile, because now with AI tools, everyone is doing that. The reality is, in order for sales development reps, business development reps to use social media marketing effectively rather than cold calling, your prospects, your future clients need to see you a lot more as a teacher, as a consultant, as an expert, as a trusted advisor, rather than someone that's just trying to book a meeting with them. And the way to do that is to get really, really client-centric, prospect-centric about what is going on in their world. And the first inclination, usually among sales development reps, is to take that information and to use that as a really aggressive hook to try to get a meeting booked. Again, the reality is most people aren't going to be ready for a meeting anytime soon. You can win the lottery every once in a while and get someone where there's extreme pain, but for the most part, there's a much bigger risk of turning them off and either using technology that physically blocks you, or they're just not going to pay attention to you anymore. What they will pay attention to, though, is tips and best practices and educational resources that are highly relevant for who they are and what they're struggling with most in their current jobs. How do we figure out what they're struggling with most in their current jobs? Once we're really precise about that ideal client profile and that addressable, finding that addressable market and target account list, is understanding those unique customer insights, the goals and challenges in their own words, and creating educational resources and educational events that allow us to earn our way in early and often, to educate and build trust, to be seen more like the teacher, the consultant, the subject matter expert, and the trusted advisor. From a practical standpoint, what this usually looks like is a monthly webinar series, a monthly lunch and learn, a monthly breakfast seminar series. And the primary goal of sales development reps is, instead of pushing for a meeting, they should be primarily looking to invite the right people to the right educational events. But that can't be every ask either. That can't be every single message where they only hear from you once a month to invite you to the next series. What should be happening is, among the other, let's say you're posting daily or 3 times a week, those event invitations, maybe 20, 25% of the post, 20, 25% of the messages. The other 70, 75% should be you taking essentially the content that was covered, the tips that were covered at the previous event, and sharing recaps from it, sharing photos, taking screenshots of slides, bullet point lists, to-do lists, task lists, key takeaways, maybe some quotes from some people that attended. All of the above that are designed to share helpful educational resources and insights that can help these folks do their jobs better. So hyper-specific to who they are and hyper-specific to helping them get one step closer to achieving a goal or being able to solve a challenge that you know that they're going through. How do you know they're going through? Because you did your homework, you did your research. So when it comes to that, the good news is, over the last decade, it's come a lot more into focus that when it comes to internal champions, or pretty much anyone that's involved in anything data center related, LinkedIn is the platform. Over 1 billion users on the platform, consistently rated year after year as the #1 most trusted B2B platform for a whole host of reasons. But it's definitely 5 or 10 years ago, a lot of people said, I don't have time to get good at all these social platforms. And at the time said, well, do your buyer persona research, but you can probably eliminate most of them and just focus on LinkedIn. And that's really just come into sharper and sharper focus over the years. In fact, I'd go so far as to say, as a sales development rep, if someone reaches out to you and you can't locate that person on LinkedIn, they're probably not all that relevant to your major project that you're working on if you do anything related to technology, because it's pretty far-fetched that an internal champion for some kind of internal any kind of technology related initiatives wouldn't at least have a minimum presence on LinkedIn in this day and age. So yeah, maybe they're in the witness protection program. Shouldn't joke about that. Maybe they're deliberately under the radar. Maybe there's a cyber stalking problem or something, but those are likely edge cases. The more likely part is they may be reaching out to you using fake information because they're a competitor. So this is where people, if you remember over the years when 10 or 20 years ago, when online dating started to become really big and no one would go out on an online date without Googling the person they were meeting for coffee or for a first date. And then LinkedIn kind of became that. That's the other big thing that's happened with LinkedIn as well, is if you as a sales development rep, your profile needs to ooze credibility. Because when you outreach to someone, whether it's by a LinkedIn message or a cold call or email or some variant of that, the recipient, a huge percentage of the time, is going to look at your profile, and they don't want to see a profile picture of you surfing unless you're in the surfboard business. They probably don't want to see a headline about how many times you've made it to President's Club, although most companies probably, well, depends on the nature of, no one wants to see that you're crushing your quota. Your boss wants to see it, sure, but your prospects, they want to see how you can help them with their specific problems. So the summary, the headline, all the narrative should be all about who you help, how you help them, why you help them. Even the featured stuff the featured items that you pin should be all about educating and building trust with that very specific kind of buyer persona. So yeah, that's definitely one way that you should be using. But I really think that it's this combination of education and using that over and over and over again as a way to build trust. And there's no reason, if you feel comfortable with one particular format, just recognize that your prospects and clients may have different preferences. So you can do text posts, you can do articles, you can do images, you can do documents, which basically is like a PowerPoint or Canva or PDF or something that you upload that has a lot of content in there. Those are getting a lot of traction. Some people like to do polls, POLLS, like surveys where people vote. Those tend to get a lot of traction. Video content, vertical videos, horizontal videos, all of the above. You know what else is really cool too that a lot of people underutilize is the LinkedIn events mechanism that allows you to invite your first degree connections to an upcoming LinkedIn Live event, an upcoming webinar, or an upcoming offline event, an upcoming physical brick and mortar kind of event. And you can invite up to 1,000 first degree connections a week. So if you're working with a few hundred prospects or a few thousand prospects and you have a couple of weeks of lead time, that's a great mechanism to help spread word to invite people to upcoming events. But yeah, that's what I'd recommend overall, is to get really, really focused on what your target buyer persona is trying to achieve professionally, what they're struggling with the most, and share valuable tips that can help them do their job better based on understanding what's going on in the world, understand how others have navigated those. And as an SDR, by being involved in your company's webinar program, by being involved in your company's breakfast seminars, lunch and learns, take notes. Take screenshots and simply be a reporter and a recapper of what happens in those events. And there's a really good chance that the exact same people that you're first degree connected to that see those posts and you're like, oh, wow, that's really, really interesting. What else do you have to say? What else do you have to say? And the dwell time and the metric. People don't, in a perfect world, everyone accepts your first degree connections. They don't necessarily have to be accepting your first degree connections anymore for LinkedIn to know that they're into your content. It's the same thing on YouTube. It's the same thing on Facebook, same thing on Instagram, TikTok. Dwell time, watch time, hanging out on a particular post now sends a very positive signal that you're interested in that kind of content. So share helpful, educational, remarkable content. And that's a really, really exceptional way to stand out from the crowd and to be seen a lot more like a teacher, a consultant, an educator, trusted advisor, subject matter expert, perhaps even a thought leader, in a way that helps you stand out from the crowd and lessen your dependence on purely using cold calling. But if you're going to use cold outreach, cold calling, cold in-mails, cold emails, I would focus on using those primarily to invite the right people to an upcoming educational event. You're far more likely to get a much more significant response than just focusing on people to book meetings. And then the people that raise their hands, that register, and that attend, you'll have a much, much, much higher likelihood of getting to the bottom of the funnel outcome that you're looking for because they trust you. And that's the biggest thing that you're trying to overcome as a sales development, as a data center SDR, using social media marketing rather than cold calling, is getting your prospects, getting your future clients to trust you enough to take the next step. Meet them where they are, offer them lots of incremental steps along the way. Sure, every once in a while, give people a chance that want to jump from step 0 all the way to step 20, but respect the fact that meeting them where they are is, especially for highly technical, highly skeptical, highly educated sales allergic prospects is usually the best place to start. So that's what I'd be thinking about when it comes to how data center SDRs can use social media marketing rather than cold calling. If you're enjoying this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, please help us spread the word by hitting the like button on whatever platform you're watching or listening on. And if you have the opportunity to rate and review that, we'd be honored if you could do so as well. We're going to take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor, and then we're going to come back with 3 more of the biggest sales and marketing challenges facing data center sales and marketing professionals.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales marketing and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Now, back to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Hey there, Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and you are tuned into the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, our weekly live show where we address the biggest sales and marketing challenges throughout data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show that you think would be interesting to you and your peers, feel free to drop that in the comments on whatever platform that you're watching on, and we'll add that to the consideration queue of topics for upcoming episodes. So what's up next? How do we improve the data center decision-making cycle, especially in the later parts of the decision-making cycle? How do we improve the data center decision-making cycle, especially in the later parts of the decision-making cycle? 2 basic playbooks. The TLR, too long don't read. the real quick tactical on how I would approach this is to primarily use more and better email marketing and more and better events. Let's talk about specifically how we can execute, how we can implement great, much more effective email marketing and great, much more effective events of our own that help to advance opportunities that get stuck in late stages and don't seem to be progressing. What it largely comes down to for most companies is understanding that the world we now live in, especially in the data center industry, is not just being dominated by high density and GPUs that use crazy amounts of power and energy and run ridiculously hot and needs all kinds of liquid cooling and all the grid power shortages that we're all up against. Sure, we're up against that. And yes, to a certain degree, there's some labor shortages in certain segments of the industry. But the reality is one of the bigger constraints that go-to-market professionals across sales, marketing, account management, product, channel partnerships, even executive sponsors need to contend with is your prospects and your clients that are the typical kinds of decision makers across most of the data center ecosystem have gotten used to self-service. And it's not so much that they're getting used to self-service because they want to do the hard work. It's that they now are able to get so much information about your product, about your service, about your category that you can't get away with being the gatekeeper of information anymore. If we think about as recently as 10 years ago, at that time, most prospects, most future clients of yours would get about halfway through their research and decision-making process. 57% was the benchmark at the time in the mid-2010s from Corporate Executive Board CEB, that's now part of Gartner. That 57% number, at least the publicly shown version, is 83%. In other words, 83% of the action, 83% of the game is over before they're willing to meet with someone from your sales team. I think that's actually considerably understated. I think it underrepresents how far into their journey they are before they are ready to have a conversation with you. I think in many cases, it's at least 85 to 90%. In other words, most of what they're trying to figure out, they're doing before you ever even know that that prospect or client exists. And 10 years ago, they were using search, social media, watching videos, listening to podcasts, going to webinars, looking at review websites. Add all of that plus ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, Perplexity, Claude, Grok, And we're now in this world where, frankly, a lot of your prospects and clients would rather spend time with ChatGPT or a similar kind of app than spending time with a human from your team. And this is a problem. We need to do better. We need to provide more value than they can get from these self-service tools. And we know this is becoming a really big issue because we're starting to see now that most people have a friend or family member that spends so much time talking to Copilot, talking to ChatGPT, talking to Gemini, that people half jokingly, half seriously are like, that person is in a relationship with ChatGPT, with their generative AI app, like literally in a like platonic, hopefully platonic relationship with that particular person because they know so much about that individual. And that same kind of instincts for immediate gratification and venting and all that stuff, this is the exact same preferences that are causing people to go to these tools instead of going to you. So we need to level up because we're in competition for attention. How do we level up? We earn our way in early and often by getting all in on education and trust building. What does this mean in practice? We need to be, even though your prospects and clients are more sales allergic than they've ever been and will jump through crazy hoops to avoid being put through your sales ringer, they still need to learn. They still need to keep their skills sharp. They still need to know how others in similar job functions and similar companies are hitting their goals, overcoming their biggest struggles and challenges that are directly and indirectly related to your category. So a lot of what this looks like in practice is inserting you and your team and your company into your ideal prospects, into your ideal clients' professional development and learning and development process. Now, there are companies that are fighting this tooth and nail, kicking and screaming, because they're having a really hard time adjusting to competitive marketplace realities. But just understand that if you sit on your hands and you're like, not fair, our buyers are different, they don't use YouTube for that, they would never ask for that kind of information on LinkedIn, and they don't even know what ChatGPT is. You're like, okay, seriously? You're telling me that you sell to IT professionals and engineers, and they've never heard of webinars, and they've never heard of LinkedIn, and they don't watch YouTube videos, and they've never heard of ChatGPT? Seriously? I'm on the young side of Gen X, and all of the baby boomers that I know that are still working full-time or part-time in this industry are all digitally transformed, nearly 100%. So I don't know who these edge cases are that you think exist that don't watch videos on YouTube, that don't look things up on ChatGPT, that don't ask questions on LinkedIn, that don't listen to podcasts, that don't listen to webinars. Even the people that are in these later stages, a great way to test this. Next time you go to a conference and you see someone up on stage who's in the later stages of their career, and you see they make a great point, take a screenshot of that slide, share it as a LinkedIn post, mention that person and say, that was a fantastic point about the cost of liquid cooling and how CFOs and engineers just simply don't get it. I love your formula. I love your approach. Thanks so much. You would be shocked how quickly, when that person gets off stage, within minutes, as soon as they've worked through the line that's in front of them, talking to them one-on-one after their thing, within minutes, they hit the like button and they say, thanks so much for attending the talk. And it was great to meet you as well today. Really enjoyed it. Within minutes, they're all digitally transformed. So if you've talked yourself into this nonsense reality that your prospects and clients are different, that they don't learn this way, you have a DeLorean, you have a time machine, are you going back to like dial-up fax modem print trade publication days? I began my career in late teens, early 20s. Some of those vehicles still existed. And the early stages of my career was the early stage of like Netscape Navigator and dial-up and AOL being supplanted by open internet and ISDN and DSL and all that stuff. But like, that hasn't existed in decades. Seriously. So like, if you think that you're going to use a golf tournament or a cabana party or an expensive sponsorship to get off the hook from having to get good at thought leadership, like, You really think that you're going to get away with insulting the intelligence of highly technical IT decision makers and engineering decision makers who are sales allergic to start with? Don't you think they see through your nonsense? So let's get real. Let's talk about what it takes to actually earn their trust, to educate and build trust. And that's why this little soapbox for the last couple of minutes, before we even get into email marketing, before we even get into events, it's really, really important to understand that the primary goal and the primary objective, the primary strategy of your email marketing and of your events should be all about educating and building trust with the right people, in the right accounts, at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, so that they see you and your client-facing team members as some of the smartest, nicest, most insightful people on the planet when it comes to anything and everything that's directly related to your primary topic of expertise. So when it comes to cold email, the instinct with cold email is, sure, everyone that's never heard of us 5 minutes ago wants to book a meeting and spend a half an hour doing free consulting and brain dumping all of their needs and objectives on a salesperson. I have no idea who the heck you are. You haven't earned the right to even ask for that yet. What most of the focus on email marketing and most of the focus of the event strategy should be getting the right people in the right accounts to say that, oh yeah, you know what? They seem to be really dialed into something that we're talking about internally. They must have done their homework. They must know what our top 5 or 6 big goals are that we're working on individually as a team and as a company this year. They must really know what we're struggling with, because it seems every time that they invite us to a breakfast seminar or lunch and learn or invite us to a webinar, each headline, each title is more relevant than the next. How did they know? That extreme relevance and that focus on providing professional development, learning, development value is the way to make your email marketing way more effective, to make your event strategy way more effective, to make it far more likely that when you get the first person from a target account to register for your event and they get the email back that says, who else should attend? We know when it comes to cybersecurity best practices for mid-market manufacturing technology execs, we know it truly takes a village. Typically, there's people involved from operations, support, engineering, cybersecurity, finance, compliance. So with that, who else from your team, what other coworkers of yours would benefit from attending? We know the teams that learn together, grow together. Simply hit the forward button, add a thoughts. You'll know that's working because you look down at HubSpot or Eventbrite or whatever you're using to capture these registrations. You're like, cool. Within the past 30 minutes, 90 minutes, 5 people from the same account all registered. That's awesome. In a perfect world, 100% of those will attend the event. Usually it's probably more like 40 or 50, 60% of the registrants will actually attend a free event like that. But either way, what we're trying to do is to influence preferences, influence how they look at methodologies, influence how they look at your category when it comes to anything and everything that's directly related to what you do, increasing our surface area quite dramatically in these target accounts with members of the decision committee. So when it comes to improving the decision-making cycle, especially in the late part, think early and often. We can't just get in there at the end. We can't just get in there in the middle. We can't just get in there early. We need to plant the seeds so they know that we provide exceptional value in these educational events. So they keep coming back month after month to part 2, part 3, part 4 in that series, where systematically you're tackling the 10 or 12 biggest goals and challenges over the next 10 or 12 months, one by one, and they learn so much that each time they keep bringing more and more of their coworkers, more and more of their team, more and more of the decision committee along with them. Eventually, they're even bringing their boss along with them. And eventually someone pulls you aside and says, there's 20 seats in your classroom. We're 8 of those 20 seats. You know what? Instead of us coming here, we're doing an all hands next month. Why don't you just come in and present your talk to the entire IT organization, to the entire company, so you can get in front of all of us at once? We're like, that would be awesome. So if you want to talk about the decision cycle, when you do this really well, you're not only earning your way onto the short list, you're nearly guaranteeing that you stay on the short list. And what you'll tend to find is the more time that they're spending with you in a learning and development, professional development context where you're educating and building trust with multiple people from that company, they stop having time or interest in attending other similar events from other competing companies with yours, meaning that your webinar series, your lunch and learn, your breakfast seminar series can be so effective that not only are you driving alignment about best practices and methodologies, in many cases, you're neutralizing and knocking out competitive options. So by the time they get to the decision stage, the shortlist has gotten much shorter. Sometimes that shortlist is so short that you're the last company on the shortlist. Certainly gets rid of price sensitivity, certainly gets you in a very, very favorable position because they see you as the definitive go-to experts on your topic, on your niche within the data center ecosystem. This is the competitive weapon for improving the data center decision-making cycle, especially in the late part, is aligning your entire marketing and sales organization, account managers and product managers and channel partnership managers around the concept of being seen as the definitive go-to experts in your segment where you earn your way earn early and often, educating and building trust with the most important people in the most important accounts over and over and over again, dramatically increasing your surface area till it becomes ridiculously obvious to them that your team, your company are the only option on the board that remotely makes sense for what they're trying to achieve professionally and the biggest challenges they're trying to overcome in your category. So that's what I'd be thinking about when it comes to improving the data center decision-making cycle, especially in the late parts. If you're getting good value so far from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, be sure to hit the like button. And if you have the option on the platform that you're watching on and you have the ability to comment or rate or review this, we'd love us to get that kind of feedback as well. So what's up next? What else are we going to be addressing this week? How do we adapt the sales process, the data center sales process for modern buyers? How do we adapt the data center sales process for modern buyers? That's a great question. And I love the way that you use the word modern in there, because what that emphasizes is there's kind of old school, old fashioned dinosaur kind of buyers, and then there's today's buyers. The reality, though, is as time goes on, I really don't think that there's very many non-modern buyers anymore, just simply because if you look at the prospects and clients of yours, if you look at your ideal client profile, if you look at your target buyer personas, and you look at the demographics, even at the extreme upper end of the range, let's say your primary buyer persona tends to be, I don't know, between 45 and 65 years old. Even among those that are at the upper end of that age range, that are in the later stages of their career, just about everyone that works in an IT-related role, engineering-related role, anything where they'd be internal champion for any kind of data center-related initiative, everyone's been digitally transformed at this point. I don't know where you find the outliers who are resisting LinkedIn, who are resisting watching YouTube videos, who are resisting using ChatGPT, who are resisting having a smartphone in there with them constantly that they look at over and over and over again throughout the day. I don't know where you'd find these outliers anymore, because everyone that I know, even the baby boomers that I know that are still working either part-time or full-time in this industry, have all hit the tipping point on digital transformation and digital modern buyer preferences. So when it comes to adapting your sales process for modern buyers, basically all buyers are now modern buyers. 10 years ago, there were some non-modern buyers. There were still some people that reminisced about the days of printed trade publications and fax modems and Blackberries and dial-ups. And no, I'm just about at the age where I remember some of those at the extreme first couple of months, first couple of years of my career in the early and middle 1990s. But the reality is that stuff hasn't been part of go-to-market for a really, really long time. I think there's a significant amount of money in the data center industry that's trying to recapture that nostalgia of a world where YouTube and ChatGPT and LinkedIn weren't running the whole playbook for go-to-market, where people were like, I want to get offline. I want to sit in a golf cart. I want to sip martinis poolside at the cabana. You know, there's a certain amount of that. The struggle that I have with a lot of those investments is, one, they're crazy expensive in most cases. And second, you're bonding, you're socializing, you're schmoozing, you're having fun, but are you really educating and building trust? After the second or third drink, can you possibly educate and build trust? When they're out on the fairway, are you bringing out the curriculum and the methodologies? I sure hope not. That's not going to be a really fun experience. If you're taking folks to a football game or a basketball game or a baseball game or something like that, yeah, everyone tries to justify that as a business event by having a quick 20 or 30-minute presentation before the game starts. But if you really get into that too much, it's like you bait and switch them. You told them you were inviting them to a fun experience and you're roping them into professional development or learning and development, or even worse, an aggressive sales pitch. I, for one, am a huge believer to do what you do what you say, and say what you mean, and all of that stuff with managing expectations. And if you invite prospects to what they perceive to be a fun social party event, make it a fun social party event. Don't try to bait and switch them into breaking out the curriculum and the methodologies. If you invite them to an educational event, like a webinar, lunch and learn, make it a world-class educational experience where they learn best practices that are so ridiculously valuable that if that session, that 30 or 45-minute educational session that your CTO or one of your solutions engineers led in your own conference room or classroom was pitted up against dozens or hundreds of competing sessions at a national or global conference, they are highly confident that that session would be in the top 5. It would be in the top 1 or 2% of highest rated sessions at that entire conference, because they delivered such an outrageously level of value to the right people that were in the room and the right context, learning best practices that can tremendously move the needle on helping that particular segment achieve its most important professional goals and overcome some of its most pressing challenges and stressors that are driving them nuts, that are huge roadblocks. So when it comes to adapting your sales process for modern buyers, recognize that your prospects and clients don't want to spend a lot of time with sales teams anymore. They just don't. Does that mean that you should immediately go into your LinkedIn profile and your email signature and your business card and come up with a more favorable synonym that describes the value that you aspire to provide to your prospects and clients? I think that's part of it, but that alone is not going to solve it. The reality is, for most companies that are severely overinvested in a very outdated playbook that assumes everyone is ready for a sales conversation, these, for the most part, are culture changes that need to happen. It changes the nature of the kind of leadership conversations that you have all the way from the top down. It changes the nature of job descriptions. It changes who gets hired, who gets promoted. It certainly accelerates the urgency of upskilling, reskilling, cross-training. So most of your prospects and clients perceive that most of your client-facing team members are providing a tremendous amount of support that looks a lot more like teaching and consulting and being a subject matter expert and a trusted advisor, rather than being someone that's attached to a vendor that's trying to get a deal on the deal board and a sales closed and over the commission line so they can hit quota and earn their way to President's Club. The reality is your prospects and clients don't want to see you bragging on your LinkedIn profile about hitting President's Club anymore. Your boss does. Your boss thinks that's super cool. It's their job to get you to President's Club. It's their job to get you crushing your quota. The reality is your prospects and clients that are doing due diligence on your LinkedIn profile before they meet with you, unless you're in the sales enablement business, they're focused on completely different goals and challenges that have very little to do with you meeting quota and getting to President's Club and getting an all expenses paid vacation to Hawaii or Bali or Cannes, instead of conning your company into thinking that those conferences, okay, we're not going to go down that path. The reality is we want to educate and build trust. Because if we want to adapt our sales process for modern buyers, we need to respect that they have so many self-service options that didn't exist as recently as 5 or 10 years ago. ChatGPT has really empowered digitally savvy modern buyers to self-service to the point where they can self-service you out of the equation. In order to get you back into the equation, to get you back into being a relevant force and providing exceptional value to your prospects and clients that's better than what they can get from self-service, they can't see you anymore as just an ordinary account executive or sales development rep or account manager. They need to see you as an expert. They need to see you as a trusted advisor. And for the most part, that is a pretty profound shift into how you're spending your time and resources If you on your go-to-market team are not personally involved in educational events and creating and participating and distributing educational resources at least once a month for every one of your target buyer personas, you're leaving your company incredibly vulnerable to other competitive forces in your industry and your sector within the industry who are doing a much, much more aggressive job of investing in this kind of playbook and thinking that you'll get to it next month, next quarter, next year, because our prospects and clients aren't ready for this. I call BS on it. The reason I call BS on this is there's so many sectors within the data center ecosystem that have been running this content-centric, thought leadership-centric, event-centric playbook for well over a decade now. The data center operators, the co-location and hyperscale companies, the technology-related companies, the facility-related companies, they have been doing this in spades since the early 2010s. If you haven't been doing this, it is an enormous, enormous competitive vulnerability for being able to successfully interact, for being able to successfully educate, for being able to successfully build trust with modern buyers, your ideal clients, your prioritized buyer personas. So that's what I'd be thinking about for how to adapt your data center sales process for modern buyers, is to reimagine your priorities, reimagine your resource allocation, and make sure that all of the members of your sales team, regardless of whether they've been in the industry 25 years or 25 days, have some role that they're playing in professional development and learning and development with your most important clients, your most important prioritized buyer personas. By the way, what does the person do that's been with your company for 25 days or 25 weeks? Well, you still need tour guides, you still need concierges, you still need hosts, you still need moderators, you still need coordinators. They should be working with your event marketing folks in that particular role, shepherding prospects and clients to the smartest people in your organization as a cheerleader. I had a company that I was working with 7 or 8 years ago doing fractional CMO work, and the sales development rep started, and the following day we were doing a breakfast seminar. You know what the sales development rep did 24 hours on the job? He did a fantastic job of checking people in, and he got to meet every single person that came to the breakfast seminar and chat with them briefly and smiled and handshake and answered their question. And wow, did he do an amazing job with building rapport with everyone that attended that event. So there is a role for everyone in supporting this kind of motion. But in most cases, it requires a massive cultural adjustment that starts at the top. And usually the cultural adjustment comes from your CEO or your chief commercial or chief revenue officer. Or if you work for a huge multinational company, it's probably your division VP or division managing director or something like that, getting to the point with, you know what, I've been going on some ride-alongs with some of our most talented people, talented sales members the last couple of weeks, last couple of months, and I am shocked at how rude our prospects and clients are to some of our veterans in our company, some of the people that have the most value to add. They're condescending, they're sarcastic, they're snarky, they ghost us, and we're better than that. We know we have some of the smartest people in the industry, some of the most talented thought leaders, some of the most talented trusted advisors and subject matter experts. And it is time for us to lead with that, to get out of the vendor box and stay out of the vendor box. And because of that, our initiative going forward is to produce world-class educational resources and world-class educational events that educate and build trust with the right people in the right companies at the right time and in the right context early and often. We want to be in there in as many of those 25 to 30 touch points as possible to maximize our surface area in these target accounts throughout the decision committee. And we're going to do a world-class job of spotlighting the smartest people in our company that are in a fantastic position that exemplify what we're all about going forward. So that's what I'd be thinking about it when it comes to adapting your data center sales process for modern buyers. And that brings us to our final question that we're going to be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you're facing that you think would make an excellent topic to address in an upcoming episode, be sure to drop that in the comments, and we'll add that to the consideration queue of topics to address in upcoming episodes. So final topic, final question, what do we got? Okay, final question. How do we build trust in the data center industry with thought leadership? How do we build trust in the data center industry with thought leadership? That is a terrific question. And I would encourage you, before you get started with that, to get a much sharper definition of what data center industry actually means to your company and your current product or services roadmap that you can deliver today and what you anticipate being able to deliver in the next 1 to 2, 1 to 4 quarters. So when it comes to that, we want to make sure that we have a really clear, crisp one-page definition of your ideal client profile. If it doesn't exist today, we certainly want to know geographically where you're primed to be able to deliver the best product and service experience, the best value to your ideal clients. Can you truly deliver this globally? If not, we need to get more specific about the geographic part of your ideal client profile. Second, how big or how small are these companies? Data center industry is incredibly expansive. That means that someone that's in the industry that is a solopreneur consultant gets the exact same value from your company, or can get a lot of value from company, as someone that works as a CTO of a Fortune 50 company. And if you have a product line, if you have a service line that's that ridiculously expansive, give yourself a nice pat on the back. But most companies are not in that position. Most companies need to be way, way more specific on narrowing down the company size focus of where they can do best, where they can profitably service these companies. So from a chief product officer, product management standpoint, from a sales management standpoint, how big does a company need to be to afford your minimum product or service entry-level offering? And at what point does a company get so large that they might outgrow your company? It's possible, if you're part of a huge company, that they don't outgrow you at all. I think would be pretty far-fetched for like a global data center operator or global data center REIT like Digital Realty or Equinix or something like that to come across many situations where they have to turn a company away because they're too big. If they can't handle it, I don't know who would be able to. But for much smaller data center operators, for much smaller technology companies, facility companies, it's possible that a client size, because of the amount of employees, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of employees, the amount of geographic locations, the amount of time zones, the amount of languages, the amount of import, exports, tariffs, everything that you'd be dealing with may knock you out of consideration at a certain size. So be self-aware. How big do they need to be? How small do they need to be? What is that Goldilocks range of not too big, not too small, that fits just right for your company to build trust in the data center industry? So besides geographic limitations, besides dialing in the size of the data center industry you're going after, think about the industries, the sectors, the segments that make the most sense for your company. Because depending on what your business model is, there's a significant, of the 57 different business models that we track at the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, there's a significant amount of those that, when you take the intersection of a geographic region and a particular industry, a particular vertical market, that there's certain regulatory requirements that pop up, especially in highly regulated industries. For example, if you're a data center operator or do something related to data center technology, and you do business in the United States, and you want to be able to sell into healthcare accounts, or you want to be able to sell into financial services accounts, or you want to be able to sell into government accounts, there will for sure be compliance, certification, accreditations that come up that if you don't have them, you're not going to get very far in that particular account. They're not going to take you seriously at all, because you haven't proven that you can check the boxes on what they require as the minimum viable entry points for entering into a relationship with that kind of company. So for sure, when it comes to defining your ideal client profile, depending on the nature of what you do within the data center industry, there's certain industries that can be great if you have those credentials. And if you don't have those credentials, they should not be inclusions, they should be exclusions. And those inclusions and those exclusions become incredibly relevant when it comes to using outbound, when it comes to ads, when it comes to the drop-down lists on your web forms, when it comes to the navigation on your website pages, when it comes to how you decide what goes on the homepage, what doesn't go on the homepage, and all of the above. So what we're trying to get to is, when it comes to building trust in the data center industry with thought leadership, is we first need to define What is the part of the data center industry that's most relevant to your core business model, that's most relevant to your where you can monetize the best, where you can provide the most value to your intended ideal clients? And again, if you work for a huge company, it's very likely that you have a very geographically and very size expansive kind of way of looking at your ideal client profile definition. However, if you work for a much smaller company and you're trying to build trust with thought leadership in the data center industry, I would encourage you to stop trying to mow the lawn with scissors, stop trying to boil the ocean, and get a lot more precise about what getting well known, what building trust, what thought leadership looks like in the data center industry. Because it's a smaller company, and by smaller could be a few handfuls, a few dozen, a few hundred. If you are in any of those size categories, I would encourage you to build a strong beachhead in one or two segments before you worry about the entire data center industry. And the more M&A, the more mergers and acquisitions that continue to roll through at an accelerated pace throughout the global data center industry, the more incredibly important it is for you to get hyper precise about that ideal client profile definition, to get hyper precise about what you're doing to build trust and what you're doing to create and promote and distribute the right thought leadership to the right people in the right places at the right time. Because there is a very, very real possibility that if you're not tight enough in that ideal client profile definition, if you're not precise enough in how you identify and flesh out and research your primary and secondary buyer personas, there's a good chance that your thought leadership may not be attracting the right people. And the more you lean on organic, whether we're talking about organic LinkedIn or organic YouTube or organic search or all of the above, the less precision that you tend to have over attracting the right people in the right companies and at the right region. That's the reason why over the past decade, things like account-based marketing, account-based selling, ABX, account-based experience, why that has become incredibly popular in the data center ecosystem. Because when it comes to building trust with thought leadership, you really need to be getting in front of tens of thousands of different companies or hundreds of thousands of different companies. Probably tens of thousands, more realistic if you're trying to go after the entire industry. Or is it a few hundred or a few thousand that really matter, that are in the right geographic region, that are the right company size in the right industries? So that's what I'd be focusing on when it comes to defining the distribution, when it comes to defining how you're going to go after the strategy, the content strategy, the thought leadership strategy. And then in terms of building trust with thought leadership, I think it's really, really important to be there for the full journey. A lot of times when people get into content and get into posting on LinkedIn and posting on YouTube videos, they tend to over-index on content and topics that are relevant to the latest stages of the buyer's journey, as opposed to covering the middle stages and the early stages. In order for us to get in early enough that we can really shape the criteria to build trust, to drive alignment proactively early and often in the formative stages of the journey, it's incredibly important that we know the topics that are a leading indicator that they're going to be in market for your product or service a couple weeks or a couple months from now. When you do that, you can be unstoppable, because it's very likely that you've knocked out a huge amount of competition that's too arrogant, that's too lazy, that doesn't respect the self-guided buyer's journey, or all of the above. But it's not just a matter of getting found for the topics that are incredibly relevant for your product or service, but it's getting found for that category, and it's getting found for all of the related topics that are a leading indicator that someone's going to start looking at options in that category a couple of weeks or a couple months from now. And when you do this right, with early and often, and educating and building trust by using thought leadership events, the goal in most cases should be in there often enough. Here's a simple way of looking at it: often enough that it's nearly impossible for them to forget about you. And the way, from a tactical perspective, what this usually looks like is, let's say we have two prioritized buyer personas, a primary and a secondary, the most important economic decision maker, the second most important decision maker. 10 or 12 core topics that we discover when we do our homework on goals and challenges that each of those segments need to figure out. Those 10 or 12 topics for the CTO, there's 10 or 12 topics for the CFO, there's 10 or 12 topics for the board member, whoever it is. For each of those segments, those 10 or 12 topics represent the 10 or 12 topics that I would encourage you to build events around month after month. So if you have a dozen topics that came up as highly relevant as goals and challenges for the CTO that you're trying to build mind share with, that you're trying to build trust with, each month, once a month for the next 10 or 12 months, tackle one of those topics systematically. So let's say the first one has to do with compliance and regulation for that particular industry. You look at, okay, who's the top subject matter expert in our company who knows this topic inside out and backwards? I'm going to take this customer insight research to them, and over lunch, over coffee, we're going to brainstorm about an outline of what a 30 or 45-minute talk could look like on that particular topic for this particular person. If they've given talks like this at industry conferences before or webinars, they may have something that can be easily repurposed. If not, as the event producer, as the event coordinator, as the internal champion of educating and building trust and thought leadership, it's your job to pull this out of this individual. And then you take that outline, you give that to your Canva person, your Google Slides person, your PowerPoint person, whatever it is. They build a nice, gorgeous deck as a first draft. You get together with them 6 weeks ahead of time, 4 weeks ahead of time, and say, okay, here's the first draft. We've put the landing page out here. We're really psyched. We have people registering for this already. Let's fine tune it. We want you to provide amazing value. So we're highly confident that every person that attends walks away with the impression that, holy smokes, I can't believe I finally found the expert. No one has ever explained this from this perspective, this clearly, this eloquently. I totally get it now. And I'm so glad that I encouraged a couple of my coworkers along with us. Now I'm going to share the deck with the rest of our team. I can't believe I finally found they're such nice people. They're so personable. They know their stuff. Like, this is who we should be working with. And I can't wait to part two. And I'm going to bring even more people from our company to part two because I'm so psyched that I'm the one that discovered this company and discovered their subject matter experts. So that's the mindset for building trust in the data center industry with thought leadership. If you have the luxury of your prospects and clients being located nearby to your facility, to your office, you have a classroom or conference room, by all means, host these events in person. If your prospects and clients are spread out more geographically, you could do a road show, but you could also run these as webinars or all of the above. And by all means, record these, make the recording and the slides available to the people that attended, encourage them to share the recording and the slides with other people that weren't able to attend, driving alignment proactively. But this is the basic playbook for building trust in the data center industry with thought leadership, getting in there early and often. Early as possible in the buyer's journey and as often as possible in the full buyer's journey. So you are the one that's driving the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the competitive options that are in front of them. This guarantees that you stay on the short list, certainly earned you a place on the short list. And when you do this exquisitely well at a world-class level, you'll find that your educational events, your thought leadership do such an amazing job of educating and building trust that you start to knock competitive options out of contention. So when they finally get to the decision point and they're ready for a sales conversation, it is a much, much, much shorter short list. And sometimes the short list is down to literally your company. In other words, you literally won out with staying power, with stamina, with momentum, with providing exceptional value, because there's now 10 or 12 people in this company that represents 90% of the decision committee, all singing your praises because they've learned so much from hanging out with your handpicked 12 amazing subject matter experts over the last 10 or 12 months. Now, what happens when you exhaust all of the available internal subject matter experts? Well, you probably have some consultants and contractors and channel partner companies that you work with. Invite them, fill those gaps. They don't necessarily all have to be full-time salaried executive subject matter experts of your company. Your job is to provide an amazing educational experience. In some cases, great events could be a panel where you interview 3 or 4 clients that are similar to the people that are in the room, or 3 or 4 channel partners to give different perspectives to other channel partners, whatever is most relevant to your target intended audience where you're looking to build trust in the industry with thought leadership. But this is the basic playbook. If your company is not going all in on this, it's usually an executive buy-in, an executive alignment type of issue that needs to be addressed, usually starting from the most upper echelons of your company. For a small to mid-sized company with a couple handfuls, a couple dozen, maybe even up to a couple hundred employees, your CEO really needs to be bought into this, needs to be making this a front burner priority issue. For a slightly bigger company, your chief revenue officer or chief commercial officer could be an effective internal champion for this way of building trust through thought leadership. And if you're part of a large enterprise or multinational, it's probably your subsidiary VP or divisional managing partner or managing director or something along those lines. But at the end of the day, that's what I'd be thinking about when it comes to building trust in the data center industry with thought leadership. And that is the final question that we'll be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you've enjoyed this week's show, be sure to hit the like button, help spread the word. If you have the opportunity to comment or rate or review this, we'd really appreciate that as well. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you'd like to see us address in an upcoming episode, be sure to leave that in the comments. If you want to make sure that you get invited, you get notified about upcoming educational events and resources just like this, be sure to subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter so you get notified directly in your email inbox each Sunday. You can subscribe for free directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. I'm Joshua Feinberg, Feinberg, founder of the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute and host of the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. If you and I are not currently connected on LinkedIn and you would like to be sure to reference in the note along with your connection invitation that you've attended and that you're a fan of Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, and I'd be happy to be connected with you on LinkedIn. And speaking of LinkedIn, I'm always looking for really interesting guests to interview on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. If you know of someone that should be nominated to be a guest in an upcoming interview-based episode, feel free to reach out to me by LinkedIn as well. So we're so glad that you're able to join us for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. We wish you and your team and your company tremendous success in growing your footprint, in growing your brand, in growing your expertise, and growing your thought leadership throughout the data center critical facilities and digital infrastructure ecosystem. Look forward to seeing you back again next week. Enjoy the rest of your week. Take care now.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales marketing and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.